The rain had been falling since morning, steady and calm, covering the quiet neighborhood in a silver haze. Inside a small house on the edge of town, Margaret moved around her kitchen with practiced ease. She was 60, graceful, but a little tired, her short silver hair tied neatly behind her ears. The scent of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air. Today felt different, special even. Her son Ethan was visiting for the weekend, something he hadn't done in months. Margaret had woken early, excited to see him. She'd set the table with his favorite dishes and polished the old wooden chairs. Every small task reminded her of when Ethan was younger, a boy running through the halls, laughing, leaving muddy footprints behind. Now he was 32, living in the city, busy with work and always saying, "I'll come soon, Mom." And finally today he did. When he arrived, she noticed how much he had changed. His shoulders were broader, his face older, his eyes thoughtful. He hugged her tightly, and for a moment she felt time stop. It was the kind of hug that carried years of distance and love in one brief moment. "Dinner smells amazing," he said, smiling as he took off his coat. "I made your favorite." She replied warmly, "You look thinner. Don't they feed you in the city?" He laughed, the same laugh she had missed hearing every morning when he used to live here. They sat down at the kitchen table, the same one that had seen thousands of shared meals, family talks, and quiet mornings. The sound of the rain on the window made everything feel slower, gentler. As they ate, they talked about simple things, his job, her garden, the new neighbors. She noticed that sometimes he would pause between sentences, like he wanted to say something more. His eyes wandered around the room, taking in the family photos, the warm light, the quiet. When dinner was done, Ethan insisted on helping with the dishes. "You've done enough, Mom. Sit, I'll handle this," he said, rolling up his sleeves. Margaret laughed softly and handed him a towel. "You always say that, but you never dry the dishes properly." He grinned. "Maybe I just want you to stay here and talk while I pretend to help." It was a simple line, but it filled the room with warmth. Margaret leaned on the counter, watching him wash the plates. There was a moment, brief but deep, when she saw not the little boy she once knew, but the man he had become. And it made her proud, yet strangely emotional. After they finished, they sat together in the living room. The fireplace crackled, throwing a soft glow across the room. Margaret lit a small candle on the table. She loved the quiet, the kind of silence that only existed. When two people understood each other completely, they began reminiscing. Ethan talked about the time he fell off his bike in the driveway, and she had to chase the ice cream truck to stop his crying. Margaret laughed so hard that tears formed in her eyes. It felt like old times, the kind she had missed more than she ever admitted. Then the laughter faded, replaced by a thoughtful calm. Ethan looked at his mother with gentle eyes. "Mom," he said after a moment, "do you ever get lonely here?" She blinked, a little surprised. "Lonely? Oh, maybe sometimes," she said lightly. "The house is too quiet now, but that's part of getting older." He leaned forward, his expression soft but serious. "You've always been here for everyone, me, Dad, even the neighbors. You're the kind of person who gives everything. But who takes care of you, Mom?" The question hit her harder than she expected. She smiled, trying to hide the sudden ache in her chest. "I'm fine, Ethan. I keep busy. I have my book club, my garden. I like the quiet." He didn't look convinced. "You say that, but I can tell you miss having people around. I don't like the thought of you being here alone all the time." She didn't answer right away. She looked at the candle instead, watching the small flame flicker. "You're sweet," she said softly. "You've grown into such a kind man. Your father would be proud." Ethan smiled faintly. "You made me that way." A comfortable silence followed, the kind where no words were needed. The rain outside softened, turning into a mist against the window. Margaret felt an old, unspoken feeling rise. Not sadness, but longing. Not for something romantic, but for connection. The kind of closeness that comes only when someone truly sees you. Then Ethan spoke again, his tone careful. "I've been thinking about something lately," he said. Margaret turned toward him, curious. "What's that?" He hesitated, then said, "I might move back here. To this town." She froze, her heart skipping. You mean it? He nodded. Yeah, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time to come home. The city's too much sometimes. I miss real quiet, real family. I miss you. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she laughed softly, brushing them away. Oh, Ethan, you don't have to do that for me. Not, he said quickly. I want to. I want to be closer to you again. Life's too short, Mom. You shouldn't spend it alone. His voice was gentle, his words honest. Margaret felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, relief, disbelief. For so long, she had hidden her loneliness behind a smile, never wanting to burden him. Now, here he was, offering something she hadn't dared to hope for. Time? She reached out and took his hand. It was warm, steady, reassuring. You have no idea how much that means to me, she whispered. He squeezed her hand lightly. Actually, I think I do. They sat there quietly, holding hands across the small table, the candle burning low. The moment was simple but full of meaning. The distance of years, the silence of days spent apart. All seemed to fade in that small golden light. For the first time in a long while, Margaret felt peace. Not because life had changed suddenly, but because she knew she wasn't forgotten. She wasn't just a memory in her son's busy world. She was still home, a place he wanted to return to. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. Ethan leaned back, looking around the house that held so many of their memories. I forgot how good it feels here, he said softly. Margaret smiled. It's always been good. You just forgot how to notice. He chuckled, and she joined in. The laughter was soft, almost like a sigh of relief, as the candle flickered one last time before going out. Margaret thought of something she hadn't felt in years, hope, and deep inside. She knew this was not the end of something, but the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. It was a quiet night, but one that changed everything. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains, filling the kitchen with a soft golden glow. Margaret woke earlier than usual, the quiet comfort of last night still lingering in her mind. She moved slowly, preparing breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, just like Ethan used to like when he was a teenager. For years, she had eaten alone, the silence at the table a reminder of how much time had passed. But today she smiled, knowing someone would sit across from her again. Ethan came downstairs a few minutes later, hair tousled, wearing one of his old flannel shirts that she had kept all these years. You still make the best coffee, he said, inhaling deeply as he poured himself a cup. Margaret chuckled. That's because I use love instead of measurements. He grinned and took a seat. And for a moment, it felt like the past had gently returned, not painfully, but softly, like a song she hadn't heard in years. They ate quietly for a while before Ethan spoke. I meant what I said last night, he began. About moving back. I've been thinking a lot about it. Margaret looked up, cautious but hopeful. You don't have to decide so fast, Ethan. You've got your own life out there. I know, he said, sipping his coffee. But maybe that's the problem. I've built a life that looks right on paper, but doesn't feel right anymore. She listened closely, her hands resting on the table. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly. The city's loud rushed. Everyone's chasing something, promotions, apartments, relationships, and it never feels enough. I thought I wanted that too, but lately I've been thinking about what really matters. You, family, time. His words filled her with quiet pride and worry at the same time. She didn't want him to give up his dreams, but she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her heart hearing him say those things. I just don't want you to regret anything, she said gently. Life can't be paused for me. He smiled. It's not about pausing. It's about starting something real again. There was something deeply sincere in his voice, something she hadn't heard in him for years. He had grown not just older, but wiser, more aware of what truly held value. After breakfast, Margaret suggested they take a walk. The air outside was crisp and cool, the streets lined with autumn leaves that crunched under their feet. It was the kind of small-town morning that city people often missed: the smell of wet earth, the sound of birds, the easy rhythm of life. They walked past the park where Ethan used to play baseball as a kid. "Remember when you hit that ball through the neighbor's window?" she teased. He laughed, shaking his head. "You made me go over and apologize with a pie." "That's right," she said proudly. "Charm fixes everything." They both laughed, and the simple joy of the moment made Margaret's heart feel lighter. It was rare, this kind of peace. She realized how much she had longed for just being with him. No phones, no rush, just presence. As they returned home, Ethan looked around thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "this house has so much character. You've kept it so well. It feels alive." Margaret smiled. "It's because I've talked to it for years. Houses need company too." He looked at her with a mix of affection and sadness. "You really have been alone too long." She sighed softly. "Alone, yes, but not unhappy. There's a difference." He nodded, but she could tell he didn't entirely believe it. Later that afternoon, they sat together on the porch. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and rain. Ethan leaned back on the old bench, glancing at the empty yard. "What if I fixed that fence for you?" he said suddenly. "It's been leaning since I was a kid." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now you notice it." "I was too busy running around back then," he said, laughing. "Now I actually see things." She watched as he stood and inspected the fence, his hands brushing the worn wood. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot to her. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He was already starting to belong again for the rest of the day. Ethan worked outside, hammering, painting, fixing old things she'd given up on. Margaret stayed nearby, bringing him lemonade and watching him through the window. It wasn't about the fence. It was about watching him come home to himself. When evening came, he joined her on the couch, both tired but content. The TV was on, but neither was really watching. "You know," she said softly, "seeing you here again, working, laughing, it feels like life giving me back something I thought I lost." Ethan turned to her, eyes gentle. "You didn't lose it, Mom. You just needed someone to remind you it's still here." That sentence stayed with her. It echoed in the quiet spaces of her mind even after they stopped talking. It wasn't just about family. It was about rediscovery, about remembering that love doesn't end when people grow older or move away. It simply waits, patient and quiet, until it's found again, before bed. Ethan stepped into her room, leaning against the doorframe. "Hey," he said softly, "would it be okay if I stayed another week? I've got vacation days to use." She looked up from her book, surprised but happy. "Of course, I'd like that very much." He smiled, gave her a light kiss on the cheek, and said, "Good night, Mom." When he left, Margaret closed her eyes, feeling tears press at the corners. Not of sadness, but of fullness. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed hearing someone walk down the hall, hearing laughter in the living room, or seeing another plate beside hers at the table. That night, she slept peacefully. Outside, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic, and inside, the house finally felt alive. The quiet that used to feel heavy now felt warm, like comfort instead of emptiness. The next morning, Ethan woke early and brewed coffee for both of them. When Margaret came into the kitchen, still half asleep, he was already setting the table. "Now this is new," she said, amused. "Don't get used to it," he joked. "But I thought I'd try." They ate breakfast together again, and it felt like the start of something steady, like they were rebuilding not just walls or fences, but a bond that had quietly faded and now returned stronger as the day passed. Ethan mentioned looking at small houses nearby. "Maybe I'll find something close," he said casually. Margaret looked at him, her heart swelling. "That would be lovely," she said simply. He smiled. "I think it's time to come home for good." She didn't reply right away. She just reached across the table, resting her hand over his. Words weren't needed. The look they shared said enough: gratitude, love, and peace. For Margaret, that day marked something beautiful. Not an ending, not a beginning, but a return. The life she thought had grown quiet suddenly had a heartbeat again. And as the sun broke through the clouds, filling the kitchen with golden light, She realized that sometimes the best surprises in life are not the grand ones, but the simple, heartfelt moments that whisper, "You're not alone anymore." By the third day of Ethan's stay, the house no longer felt like a place waiting for life to return. It was alive again. The clinking of dishes, the hum of conversation, and the quiet laughter between mother and son filled the walls that had once echoed with silence. Margaret noticed how easily Ethan had settled back in, as if time had folded, returning them to something they'd both been missing. But underneath the warmth, there was also a quiet tension, something unspoken lingering between them. A mix of love, guilt, and realization. That morning, Ethan sat by the window, sipping his coffee while reading the local paper. Margaret was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared pancakes. The smell of butter and syrup filled the air. "You always made these on Saturdays," Ethan said, glancing up. "It feels like I'm 16 again." Margaret smiled. "Except now, you actually wash the dishes after." He laughed, nodding. "Fair enough." The easy back and forth made her heart lighter, but she also sensed something on his mind. He seemed thoughtful, distracted even. When she asked if everything was all right, he hesitated before saying, "Yeah, just thinking about things." After breakfast, Ethan offered to help clean the attic. It had been years since anyone had gone up there. Boxes were stacked high with old photo albums, letters, and forgotten memories. The air was dusty and warm, sunlight streaming through a small window. Margaret followed him up, her steps slow but steady. "I can't believe all this is still here," she murmured. Brushing off an old box labeled Ethan's School Years, he opened it, pulling out crayon drawings, trophies, and school photos. "Wow," he said softly. "You kept everything." "Of course I did," she replied, smiling. "Mothers keep memories even when they fade for everyone else." As they sorted through the boxes, Ethan found an envelope tucked inside an old yearbook. It was sealed, yellowed from time. "What's this?" he asked. Margaret froze. "That's your father's handwriting." He carefully opened it, unfolding the letter inside. The words were simple but heartfelt. His father, years ago, had written about how proud he was of Ethan, how he hoped he'd grow into a kind man who never forgot where he came from. Ethan read silently, his jaw tightening. "He wrote this before he left for that last trip," Margaret whispered. "He never came back." Ethan folded the letter slowly. "I didn't even know this existed." "I didn't want to burden you with it back then," she said, her voice trembling. "You were too young to understand loss like that." He looked at her, and in that moment, something deep shifted. He wasn't just seeing her as his mother, he was seeing her as a woman who had carried years of quiet strength, raising him alone while holding on to memories too painful to share. "I should have come home sooner," Ethan said quietly. "You came when you were meant to," she replied gently. "Life has its own timing." The air in the attic grew still, heavy with emotion. Ethan placed the letter back into the box, then reached out and hugged her. For the first time in years, she felt him hold her not out of duty, but out of understanding. It wasn't dramatic, it was simple, real, and full of meaning. Later that evening, they sat in the living room, watching an old family movie on DVD. The laughter from the past played through the speakers, and Margaret's eyes glistened as she saw her younger self on the screen. "Holding baby Ethan. You were so small," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "And you looked so happy." "I was," she replied. "Even when things were hard." He leaned back, thoughtful. "You always made it look easy." "It wasn't," she admitted. "But love makes difficult things bearable." The film ended, and silence filled the room. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the trees. Ethan spoke again, his voice low. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what kind of person I've become. I've made mistakes, chased the wrong things. But being here, it's grounding me again." Margaret nodded. "We all lose ourselves sometimes. The good thing is, you've found your way back." He looked at her with a softness that made her heart ache. "You always believed in me, even when I didn't deserve it." "You always deserved love, Ethan," she said firmly. "You just needed to remember that." The clock ticked in the background. marking a gentle rhythm in their conversation. Ethan smiled faintly. I think Dad would have wanted me to come back too. He would have been proud, she replied. You're more like him than you realize. The next day, Ethan began fixing more things around the house, replacing bulbs, mending shelves, cleaning the garage. It wasn't about chores. It was about restoring something between them. Margaret watched him quietly, her heart swelling with gratitude. For years, she'd managed everything alone, convincing herself she didn't need help. But now she realized that sometimes love means letting someone share the weight. As they took a break, Ethan found an old photo album on the counter. Can we look at this together? He asked. They sat side by side, turning the pages filled with faded memories. There were birthday parties, holidays, and ordinary moments that had somehow become precious. Margaret pointed at a picture of young Ethan holding a cake. You cried because the frosting melted. He laughed. I still remember that. You spent the whole night baking it again. I couldn't let your birthday end in tears, she said warmly as they talked. The distance that had grown over years of absence quietly disappeared. Each shared story pulled them closer, weaving their memories into something new, something healing. When evening came, Ethan stood at the window, watching the sunset. He said softly, I've been offered a position that lets me work remotely. I could do it from here. Margaret turned toward him, unsure if she heard right. You mean you'd stay? He nodded. I think it's time. Maybe it's what I was missing all along. Her heart skipped. Ethan, are you sure? I've never been more sure, he said. Being here, it feels right. It feels like home again. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. You have no idea how much that means to me. That night, they sat by the fireplace, sipping tea. The house was quiet, but no longer lonely. The soft crackle of the fire mixed with their gentle laughter. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the comfort of the present and the hope for the future. Before going to bed, Eva said something that stayed with her. Mom, I used to think happiness was something you found out there in cities, careers, relationships. But I think it's been here all along. I just needed to come back and see it. Margaret smiled tenderly. Sometimes the hardest journeys are the ones that bring us home. When he went upstairs, she stayed by the fire for a while, the warmth wrapping around her like an embrace. She thought about how life had quietly shifted from solitude to companionship, from longing to peace. It was the kind of transformation that didn't come from grand gestures, but from small, heartfelt moments that stitched love back together. For the first time in many years, Margaret felt complete. The house, once silent, was filled with life again, the sound of footsteps, the smell of coffee, the laughter that echoed softly through the halls. It wasn't just her home anymore. It was their home once again, and as the night deepened, she looked toward the stairs where Ethan had gone and whispered to herself, "Thank you for coming back." The next morning, sunlight poured softly through the curtains, touching the edges of the room where Margaret sat quietly with her tea. The house felt lighter, as though the air itself carried warmth. Ethan came downstairs with his laptop tucked under his arm, still sleepy but smiling. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice calm and content. Margaret smiled back, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. They shared breakfast in quiet companionship. The kitchen, once silent for days, was alive with the gentle clatter of dishes and the smell of toast. For Margaret, this simple routine meant everything. Every laugh, every small conversation felt like a piece of her life returning. She had lived alone for so long that she forgot what it felt like to wake up to another voice in the house. Ethan began working remotely that day, setting up his desk near the window. Margaret watched him from the hallway, smiling as he adjusted cables and made his coffee. He looked at ease, like a man who had finally stopped running. Every now and then he'd glance at her and grin, and she'd pretend to be busy with her chores. The rhythm of the day was comforting. Around noon, the doorbell rang. It was Clara, Margaret's longtime neighbor and friend. "I heard your son is back," she exclaimed. Ethan greeted her warmly, and soon they were all sitting around the table sharing stories. Clara joked maybe now Margaret won't have to talk to her plants anymore. They laughed, and for a moment everything felt perfectly ordinary, something Margaret hadn't felt in a long time. After Clara left, Ethan noticed his mother looking through old cookbooks. "You're planning something?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "A small dinner, just us, like old times." That evening, she prepared his favorite meal-baked chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes, and her signature apple pie. As they sat down to eat, a soft rain began to fall outside, tapping gently against the windows. The dinner was filled with warmth and easy conversation. They talked about Ethan's childhood, his travels, and his plans now that he had decided to stay. At one point, he looked around and said, "This house feels different now." Margaret tilted her head. "Different how?" "Alive," he said simply. She smiled, blinking away tears. "It's amazing what company can do." Later that night, as the rain continued, they sat by the fireplace again. Ethan played an old song from his phone, one his father used to love. Margaret closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her. "He used to hum this every Sunday morning," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "I remember." The quiet stretched comfortably between them, filled with memories rather than silence. Then Ethan said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you ever lonely after I left?" The question hit softly but deeply. She thought for a long moment before answering. "Yes," she admitted. "But I didn't want you to feel guilty. I wanted you to live your life freely. Still, there were nights when I missed just hearing someone move in the house." Ethan's expression softened with guilt and tenderness. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have been around more." She shook her head gently. "Don't be sorry for growing up. That's what you were supposed to do. I just wish you'd known that no matter how far you went, this home was always waiting for you." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence. Ethan looked at her with deep affection. "Then I'm staying," he said quietly. "For good this time." Margaret froze, eyes widening slightly. "You mean that?" He nodded. "Yeah, I've already told my manager. They're fine with remote work. I want to be here. I want to build something real again." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. "You have no idea how happy that makes me," she whispered. The next few weeks became a beautiful rhythm of shared mornings, evening walks, and quiet dinners. Ethan fixed things around the house she had long stopped bothering with. He mowed the lawn, repaired the porch swing, and even painted the old fence. Margaret watched him with a quiet smile, sometimes helping, sometimes just enjoying the sight of her son breathing life into everything again. On weekends, they'd visit the local farmer's market or the park where Margaret used to take him as a child. They talked about the past and the future, about how small choices had led them back to this moment. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench, Ethan said, "It's funny. I thought success was about how far you go. But now I think it's about how close you can get to the people who matter." Margaret looked at him proudly. "You've grown wiser than I ever imagined." He smiled. "Guess I had a good teacher." As autumn arrived, the air grew crisp and the leaves turned golden. Margaret spent her mornings tending to her garden while Ethan worked from the porch. One day she noticed him watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "What's on your mind?" she asked. "I was thinking about Dad," he said softly, "and how proud he'd be of you. You held everything together." She looked down, her voice gentle. "I just did what love told me to do." Ethan nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I think I understand that now." That evening, they prepared dinner together, laughing as they cooked. It was simple, just pasta and salad, but it felt perfect. The air between them was filled with gratitude and affection. Afterward, they sat outside, watching the sunset. The sky glowed in shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the windows of their home. Margaret turned to him and said, "You know, when you were little, you used to say you'd never leave me." He chuckled. "I guess I kept my promise, just took a long detour." She smiled warmly. "That's all right. You came back, and that's what matters." As the evening deepened, they fell into quiet thought. The world around them slowed, And for once, neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. It was enough just to be there together, at peace. Weeks later, Margaret received a letter from an old friend inviting her to a community art exhibit. Ethan encouraged her to go. "You should show them your paintings again," he said. "You've still got it." She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. That night, as she displayed her work, she looked out into the crowd and saw Ethan standing there, proud and smiling. In his eyes, she saw her whole journey lost, strength, love, and healing. After the event, they walked home in the cool night air. Margaret looked up at the stars and said, "You know, life surprises you when you least expect it." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, sometimes the best surprises are the ones that bring you home." When they reached the house, the porch light flickered softly. Margaret paused at the door, feeling a sense of completeness she hadn't felt in years. She looked at her son and said quietly, "You gave me back my peace." He smiled and replied, "You gave me mine first." Inside, the house glowed warmly. It was no longer just walls and rooms. It was a place of love rediscovered. For both of them, it wasn't just about family. It was about forgiveness, understanding, the kind of love that asks for nothing but presence. That night, as Margaret went to bed, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Life hadn't been easy, but it had come full circle beautifully. Her son was home, her heart was full, and for the first time in decades. She drifted to sleep with a smile. Downstairs, Ethan sat by the fire, staring at the photo of their family on the mantel. He whispered softly, "I'm home, Dad, just like you wanted." Then he leaned back, listening to the soft crackle of the flames and the gentle hum of a house finally alive again. And in that quiet warmth, both mother and son found what they had lost long ago: peace, love, and a second chance at family.